Howdy folks. This machine you see before you is Hubble. This is a rack mount file and media server that I built back in 2012, and this is actually not located in my building. It's actually in a different city, so you can kind of think of it like a co-location server. It was designed to basically store movies, TV, audio, pretty much just media, and run Kodi Media Center. Of course, back then it would have been called XBMC, but it runs Kodi, and I've just got it now to do some, basically to completely rebuild everything to do with the software and the storage configuration. This machine didn't fare so well, primarily due to the way that the storage was done. It's got this case. This is, I think, an iStar USA. I honestly can't remember. I've only used this case once because I wasn't terribly happy with it. But it's got 6 discs. These 4 discs are okay, and I've got 2 discs which are both dead, and they were in RAID 5. So yeah, that's doesn't work. So I was able to recover some data, but one of these disks was flaky and like just working enough that I could get data off of it. I only had to recover a few configuration files. Everything else I have backups of, so that was fine. So I got all the data off. I didn't lose anything, which is good. But I'm going to be getting some new disks. I'm going to be setting this thing up with ZFS. So the way that my old storage configuration worked, this is the last server I have that uses it. Basically, I've got some standard hard disks. They are in an mdraid configuration. I have one partition with the OS and another partition with the data. And because you can't stripe the bootloader and the kernel in initramfs, there's a flash drive plugged into the back with just the /boot on it, and that's what it boots from. And if the flash drive dies, it's okay because you can rebuild anything that was on that using just a live CD. So it's okay to have no redundant copy of that. And this thing, I mean, it worked okay back in the day, but ZFS is a thing now, so it's kind of useless. So I went out and I got just a small SSD. This isn't my first time trying the XPG series. These use a J-Micron controller instead of a SandForce, so I'll have to see how that works. And this will be for the OS and the intent log. And then I'm going to use 5 disks in a RAID Z1 plus a spare. I know people, these are 2 terabyte disks, by the way, so that'll give me 8 terabytes of space, which should be fine for this server. And yeah, I think that's all I really need for this storage. It doesn't have to be super, it's not mission critical data, it's just media, and I have another copy of it on my own server, so it's not a big deal. In terms of hardware, it's just a Core i5, some 32 nanometer processor. I don't even remember, to be honest. 500 watt power supply. It's got Noctua fans in the back. It used to have this GeForce GT610 fanless GPU in it, and I bought this because I wanted to use the NVIDIA driver because I thought, that would be kind of I've known that there are issues with the Intel video driver and XBMC, so I decided I'd go with the NVIDIA one because I'd never had problems with it before. And I think this card is actually giving me the most problems because Kodi keeps freezing and locking up, and because this thing runs 24/7, so it needs to be truly stable. So I'm going to just rip that card out, try it on the built-in GMA. They're about the same performance, so I'm not losing any performance. And I'll just see if the Intel GMA is stable, and if it is, then great, I'll just leave the card out. If it's not stable, I'll try the card again, or maybe put an AMD card in here. I've got some 6450 or something lying around. I'm not quite sure how I'll do it. But yeah, I mean, I'll try and document me putting this thing together. I'm really busy over the next few weeks, so I'll be doing this in little parts. So I think I'll probably just snip a bunch of little videos together and release it as one big video, rather than a bunch of little tiny videos over the course of the next few weeks. So I guess that's it for part 1, just the intro. I got to go out and buy some new disks before I can start anything, because I can't even build an array unless I have at least one more disk. So I gotta go and do that now. So I just got back from the local computer store, picked up 2 more of the exact same drive. Seagate still makes these. These are the ST2000DM001. The original drives, as you can see, I labeled them. They were from end of 2012. Even though the date code says 13 something, which is kind of unusual. So I'm not entirely sure how that works out, but I've actually lost the spreadsheet with all of the data on these disks, so I have to rebuild that, unfortunately, but that's not a big deal. It's kind of interesting to see how they've changed these drives because, you know, it's been 3 years, the label is completely different, and they've also changed the board on the bottom. The board has now got this angle on it. They've obviously found a way to make it smaller. The bearing on the motor is different. So anyway, I just gotta screw these into the hot swap bays, and I'll put them in the server, and hopefully none of these are DOA. Now I know what some of you guys are gonna say, and you're gonna say, why the hell are you buying Seagate drives? They make terrible drives, and I know that. And realistically, I've actually had much worse of an experience with Western Digital than I have Seagate. I've built several servers with both, and I've found that the Western Digitals die a lot sooner than the Seagates do. Of course, Hitachi or the HGST now make the best drives, but I can't justify the price. In fact, all of my machines use Seagate disks, and I really haven't had any serious problems. This is the only machine that has actually technically suffered data loss as a result of drive failures, and it was more due to the fact that I was using mdraid. The machine was unattended, and these disks basically had silent data corruption occur, which is pretty much, you know, mdraid can't protect against that, and in this case it didn't. So ZFS will, of course, protect against it, so I feel totally fine putting this back in a RAID Z1 configuration, which is effectively RAID 5. So I'm okay with that just because it's ZFS. If this had to be hardware RAID or it had to be a software RAID again, I would not trust this setup, and I would probably find some other way to do it. But ZFS to the rescue, so that's what I'll be doing. So hopefully I'll put these back in and make sure that all these work properly, and then I'll get on to installing the SSD and installing the OS. So I've got the new disks in, I've got the OS installed. I'm using Ubuntu 14.04 LTS. I would have liked to have held off until 16.04 came out, but unfortunately I really had to do this now. The machine was completely screwed, so it's fine. It's still supported for another 5 years, so I'm good there. So I got ZFS installed, configured up my array, so RAID Z1 with the first 5 disks, and you can see the one down here is a hot spare. It doesn't have any activity on it. So I'm just copying media, and pretty much the slow part in this is the gigabit network on this machine. This just has a single gigabit card, so that's why it's all bursty like this. It's just filling up a buffer and dumping the disk, because the disks in this are much faster than the network. But again, it was never designed to need really fast networking. It was pretty much just for loading it up with data, which usually happens in very small bursts as we purchase things, so not a big deal. So I was just copying more media over, and I was averaging somewhere around 80 megabytes a second, and you can technically do, I mean, if you do the math, it's about 120 megabytes a second over gigabit Ethernet, assuming your controllers can actually do that. So that was a little bit low for me, and then I kind of forgot. I mean, I just set the machine up. The MTU was still set to the default, which is 1500, on pretty much every NIC and operating system I've ever seen. So, of course, just a quick config change, brought it up to 9K, and now I'm sitting perfectly stable at 104 megabytes a second. So it's kind of almost like a trap for young players. If you're building any kind of hardware that goes on a network, just enable jumbo frames. I mean, pretty much everything that was made in the last decade is almost guaranteed, like 99.999% guaranteed to support jumbo frames. And you're basically just throwing performance out the window if you don't enable it. It's just, in my opinion, it's kind of dumb. So Yeah, it's really easy. I mean, you can specify MTU as a configuration option in etc network interfaces. In Ubuntu, you can just edit configuration and just type in the MTU. Windows, it's under adapter properties. It gives you it from a drop-down list. I mean, it's really easy, and I mean, that took this copy down from something like 7 hours to 5 hours just by 3 seconds and a couple clicks. So definitely something you want to do if you're building an Ethernet file server. So just some other things really quick about ZFS configuration. Of course, you want to tune your configuration to your server, but some things I think should just be applicable to all machines. For example, setting compression on. Compression in ZFS is so incredibly cheap. I mean, it's basically free. The algorithm is amazingly good on files that are uncompressible and things like that. So it should be default on, but it isn't for some reason. The other thing that I think should also be default to on is X attributes set to SA. And basically, it's quite complicated how this actually works, but it stores extended attributes in the file system in a different way, and it can improve latency quite drastically. And again, I don't entirely know why it's disabled by default, because I don't see any downsides to it. But that's definitely something that you want to go through and make sure you check that you've set before you start putting data on your data sets, because of course, if you set compression after the fact, all the data that you've added up until that point will never get compressed. So it has to be one of the first things you do. There's a whole bunch of other parameters that you should make sure you set before as well. So for example, if you look under Z-pool, there's a few things that I always set when I create the pool itself. I set auto replace to on, because I think if you have a hot spare, it should automatically go to the hot spare if something goes wrong. The other thing I always set is auto expand, and basically that is where if you replace all the disks in the array with bigger disks, it'll automatically jump up in size to the new disks. And if you don't set that flag before you replace and resilver the first disk, you can never auto expand. So you should always set that right when you create the pool before you forget. The other thing, which I think is quite commonly known, but I'll mention it, is the A shift, and that's basically the how many bytes per block to use on the physical disks. So in this case, it's set to 12, which means 2 to the power of 12. 12 is the 4096 byte blocks. 9 is 512 byte blocks. So if you're using, I mean, technically I believe it always defaults to 9 because 512 bytes is the standard, but if you're using any of the new advanced format disks, they're all natively 4K blocks, and they may show themselves as being 512 byte blocks, but that's kind of like an emulation, and it's like a compatibility mode effectively, and you're not going to get the same performance out of the drive if you do that. So again, that has to be set at pool creation. So make sure you do that as well. So I know it's been a while since my last video, but here is Hubble in its natural habitat here in my family's house. It's just the furnace room, so unfortunately I can't. This is about the quietest it gets in here. There's always fans and stuff running because the HVAC is in this room. So anyway, before I show you anything else, I want to let you know that I had absolutely nothing to do with the design and installation of the AV and home automation controllers in this house, because it is one of the most disgusting setups I've ever seen. This was inherited when my family bought this house from the previous owner, and he basically told the company who installed this to pretty much cut costs whatever way possible, and that cost pretty much just
they cut it by not bothering to rack anything, and all of the cables are just, it's just a mess. I mean, I would not, I don't want to deal with this, to be honest. It's pretty awful. So right now it's just sitting on a coffee table, because we're in the process of getting a proper rack and, you know, doing all that stuff. But yeah, it's a mess. So anyway, since the last video, I've installed Kodi, of course. I've got the overscan correction done, all that kind of stuff. I've got it, you know, auto emails me when drives fail, just a bunch of scripts and stuff like that. Pretty much that's the only thing I really had to do. Oh yes, I had an issue with the audio as always, because the way that this setup works. Actually, let me go over the hardware here, and then that'll make more sense. So up here we've got a shitty Cisco modem router for cable internet. We have an analog video distributor. So there's two twisted pair Cat6 which run to all the rooms, and this distributes component video over that. It's really old, and this is one of the biggest problems with the whole setup. It really should be HDMI, but unfortunately that's what we've got. A power cleaner, it's not a UPS, it's just a power cleaner, because the line voltage in this house does some really nasty things, especially when the furnace cycles on and off, because it's really odd. I have two UPSs, they're both the same ones. If you remember my other videos, it's the exact same one as what I use in my house. I own like 4 of these, and there's another one down here. And these are primarily for smoothing out voltage, things like that. If I look at event count, since the last time I reset this, it's 181 power events this thing has tripped in for. I mean, that's pretty bad, to be honest. There's 2 cable boxes for different zones. Then we have analog video or analog audio distribution. So these are just Class D multi-zone power amps. There's a main box and there's 2 external amps. So these power in-ceiling speakers that are throughout the house. There are basically two surround sound zones, and there's a 7.1 channel receiver and a 5.1 channel receiver which power those zones specifically. There's a bunch of old useless Blu-ray players and DVD players which are not used anymore, of course, because Kodi exists. There's these 2 Control 4 home controllers. These are basically the automation controllers that run this thing, and these are terrible. I mean, pretty much all these are is just IR blasters. There's just RF remote controls which basically tell these things to blast out infrared to these little stick-on IR emitters which you stick on all the gear. It's under electrical tape in a lot of cases, but that's just how all of the gear is controlled. And there's no feedback, so if one device, you know, turns off or whatever, there's no way for the controller to know that, and you've got to come down here, get on a ladder or whatever, and, you know, do stuff. It's really terrible, and these things are really slow. I don't know how they're so slow, and the fact that they needed 2 of them, these are linked together because apparently one of them was not powerful enough to do IR blasting. I mean, honestly, if I didn't need all the IR codes and stuff and all of the, you know, the control loops that are, you know, programmed into these, I just fucking do this with a Raspberry Pi, because this is dumb. I mean, these things take about 15 minutes to boot after a power failure, like one long enough that the UPSs don't run out. 15 minutes to boot the Linux kernel. What the fuck is wrong with these things? I don't know. It's pathetic. And I've just got an Asus RT N66U as the router / primary AP. There's a 56U upstairs, just to get some more coverage in the office, which is where there's a dead zone, of course. So that's wired to this through some of the extra Cat6 that they ran, thankfully. So, and then there's just a radio here as well, for some you know, radio in rooms and stuff, and there's little control panels and stuff on the walls that you can turn this on and off. I mean, they had good intentions when they designed the system, but there's a lot of things that I would have done differently. Whatever. This is actually one of the products that I designed. It's a controller for the cable boxes, but it's been disconnected because the problems have seemed to have gone away. There was a big issue back when these cable boxes were they received a major firmware update and they changed everything, and they were getting patches pretty much almost every night. And these things need to stay on because the controllers are stateless. So if these things reboot, they're on, and then they get a firmware update, they reboot, and they don't go back into the powered on state, they go into standby, but this doesn't know that. So you'd have to come down here every day and turn them back on. So this was just a monitoring device. That's all it really was. There's just a PIC 16 in there, a super cap to keep it running, because it monitors using the switched outlet on the back of the devices so that it doesn't occupy any more space. I should take that apart at one point. But anyway, there's just another UPS down here sitting on a box because the cables don't reach. It's just so ghetto. But back to this. The reason why the audio is so annoying is because I've got to drive optical SPDIF for these two receivers so we can get surround sound. So that's done via just an optical splitter. And I also have to drive simultaneously stereo analog to this system, because depending on where you are, you need either one of these receivers being driven or you need it going to an analog, especially if you're listening to music, for example. Like, you just want music in a room. Obviously, you're not going to be using these, but maybe you are using these, so you've got to have both. And Kodi has their pass-through, which doesn't really work in this situation because it only passes through full surround. It doesn't duplicate. Pulse Audio has the ability to duplicate, but it doesn't work for some reason. So I ended up having to uninstall Pulse Audio, which breaks Ubuntu Desktop, unfortunately. It uninstalls the system settings app, it uninstalls the volume control icon. It's really kind of nasty. But I'm running straight ALSA with my own custom ALSA config, which is really kind of... It's wishy-washy. It works in every setup except for you can't get surround to... Yeah, you cannot get surround sound to the stereo to the stereo distribution. That doesn't work for some reason. So, to be honest, it's not really applicable. It's probably never going to happen. So, I'm not worried. But yeah, I mean, the system works pretty well. It hasn't locked up yet, which is really good. I'm quite happy about that. Although usually the lockups would happen after like a month of being up or so. So it hasn't been running long enough to sort of manifest that issue should it still exist. So I don't really know. One thing that I should mention is how this is connected to the analog video distributor. Of course, this is component video, and of course, this is a PC. So the only analog output that I've got on this is VGA. Of course, VGA and component video are not the same thing. And the company that makes this, which is Audio Authority, they make this product here, which is basically it's just a VGA to component converter box. And don't ever buy this. I'm warning you now. The 9A60, I think they replaced this with the 9A60A. Don't buy either of those, because this does not do any scanline conversion at all. And if you remember, if you're old enough to remember mode lines for the X server, having to spend weeks pulling your hair out trying to get mode lines that worked with one monitor, and you know how much better your life has been not having to deal with mode lines? That thing needs mode lines, because it doesn't even have EDID out of it. You have no idea, like the system has no idea what it's driving. So it claims that it can do sync for 1080p HD, which it can do. Yes, technically it can do. But what mode lines will make it work on an HD TV? And they don't give you that information. Going through a mode line database, you can find mode lines that'll work with one TV, but there's 5 TVs plugged into this. and they all don't want the same mode line. So I've spent about 2 months trying different mode lines and tweaking things, and I've been able to get a mode line which will sync with 3 of the 5 TVs. And that's the best that I can do. And you can see the sync isn't really proper because it's all the way to one side, but not on the other. There's a lot of overscan on this side. So, I mean, that's the best I can do. Apparently, now they make a model that does scanline conversion and everything, and it's like $500 for a fucking box. So, yeah, no, that thing is going, because we've replaced the power supply in this twice. This box on the bottom, which is basically where the actual Cat 5 or Cat 6 distribution connects to, this is basically all the component input and power supply and not power supply. This does. I think this does all the logic and processing, and then this is just a distribution box. But they both have power supplies. They both have just wall wart transformers. And the transformer that's on the bottom of this has died twice. The original killed itself, burned itself black on the inside. We replaced it. I don't know with where we got the other one. That power supply almost killed me by putting mains on the outside of the DC barrel jack, which was supposed to be negative, and that became hot. So yeah, that was fun. So it's just running off of like a laptop power supply. It's actually an 18 volt supply. I'm running it at 19 volts, but it seems to be okay with that. I think they just use that for the differential swing on the outputs, and the boxes don't seem to care about that. I should do really a whole video on this setup at some point, because I have so much to say about it. One thing I may tack on the end of this video is some pictures of what this video distributor talks to. It has these panels that go in the wall, and you can plug the component video into them, and they are probably the most disgustingly bodged up pieces of gear I've ever seen. They have not just like, a couple bodge components or a couple bodge wires. They have a bodge board. It's so bad, and I don't know how they can mass manufacture those. They must not. I mean, they must be done in very low quantity. But yeah. Anyway, I know this has turned into a rant of this setup, but I've spent far too much time dealing with this. I really kind of just want to rip it out, but unfortunately I can't do that because I'm not licensed to have the control over my own home controllers. So I have to pay some dude like $150 an hour to deal with these things. So unfortunately, I can't rip any of this out until they deal with it. So it kind of just stays the way it is. But yeah, the server's fine, and I'll probably update, later if anything goes wrong, if the video problem arises again and I have to come back here and fix it. But other than that, everything's working great. So yeah, I think that wraps everything up. Hopefully you enjoyed this. This turned into a rant, unfortunately, but hopefully you enjoyed this part anyway. Thanks for watching.